Yeah, I think the challenge, right, is that, if you look at medical school curriculum, they actually don't teach you a whole lot about nutrition. But I think challenge number one is what resources are available to you. And number two, how much time do you have to actually counsel the patient and say, look, here are all the options that are available to you.
Mm.
And let's now figure out what's what.
You're just funny. It's funny, the way you tell the story and everything.
Funny how?
Come here, though. Yeah, he's crazy, see? Who are you?
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Are you ready?
So again, hey, thanks for coming on the show. This is a real treat for me because I looked at your content and I could relate to a lot of what you're talking about. Mainly because, and I'm going to dip into, your background, and I want to get into that. But I also just kind of wanted to share my appreciation for the type of content you're doing. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease a few years back, but I went through this gnarly journey in the past decade where I would be going to the hospital, this going back 10 years ago, and I would get blocked up, and doctors would just give me, laxatives and tell me to drink a lot of water and to do some fasts, and, it'll clear up on its own. And that was years and years went on. And eventually I saw a gastro, and they gave me some prednisone and some medication to, stop the inflammation that I was having because they didn't really know what it was. And this is after x-rays and CT scans and all this stuff. And then eventually I went into the hospital in Las Vegas on a sales conference. I almost passed out from the pain. I was green. They wouldn't even let me go on the plane to go back home. And I was in there for about a week. And that's when I got a couple specialists that came to me. And ever since then, they diagnosed me with Crohn's, but immediately they put me on Humira and some other, crazy medications. And I was having some bad reactions to that. And, fast forward to now, 2024, I'm off medication, but only because I decided about 3 years ago to really take my health. And, like I told you when we were off air, I want to take my health seriously, even though I had a background in health and wellness. I was a trainer. I've always been very active. I've been very fit, low body fat, caloric intake was down. But for whatever reason, every hospital visit, every doctor's visit, every gastro specialist, every doctor that was supposedly giving me the right answers, the only thing that worked for me was changing up my eating. And out of the, dozen doctors and specialists that I saw, not one of them even suggested maybe there was a 1% chance that I should mess around with my eating habits and maybe it'll be fixed. Since then, I'm happy to report no medication, haven't had a hospital visit since. I still have flare-ups occasionally because it's, there's no cure for it, obviously, but the inflammation doesn't continue. It just, I know when it's coming and I know what to do to avoid it, and it has nothing to do with medication. So I appreciate the type of content you put out, and a lot of people that I have on my podcast where it's not all health and wellness, but I always love talking to doctors that don't share, not saying these guys aren't bad doctors, but kind of outside the realm of what we're told. And that's a lot of your content of, it's not a healthcare system. It's a what?
A sick care system.
Sick care system, yeah. I love that. So if you can, I just kind of want to give you that quick background because I don't talk about my Crohn's a lot on this podcast, mainly because everyone knows about my Crohn's that listen to my podcast. They're probably sick of hearing me. But I'd love to know kind of your background, your field of study, and what kind of got you on this trend to start making content like this.
Yeah, so by training, I'm triple board certified physician. So internal medicine, which is adult medicine, pediatrics, which obviously is for children, and obesity medicine. So, my clinical training is that, but I also have a master's in health informatics and also working on my MBA right now. So it's been a wild journey. I've held a variety of roles, whether it's a hospital-owned health system doc, whether it's a medical director in a healthcare startup, at corrections, moonlighting at the VA, and now in my own private practice. So it's been really interesting to sort of be in all different aspects of healthcare and different ways in which you deliver care. And I get to just take the best of everything that I've learned and put it together. So, my personal philosophies, right? I tell people, yes, I'm an allopathically trained doc. So yes, I'm an MD, but I incorporate elements of integrative, functional, precision, and lifestyle medicine into the way I work with patients. I don't think it's an all or none. I find that, and you may feel this way too as well, that healthcare is very polarized. It's either I'm all about supplements or I'm all about drugs. And the reality is that the answer is somewhere in between.
Mm.
And then you have to figure out, well, for what problem, what is the best solution, and what do we know about those solutions?
That's right.
And how do we individualize it?
Yeah, that's such a great approach too, and I feel like it is polarizing for sure because a lot of doctors that I've had on here, and specialists and nutritionists, they all kind of carry that same ideology, political ideology. It seems like where if you ever talk to, I've lost friends during the pandemic because I didn't share their same beliefs on certain political views, and it's fascinating that the community that you live in, correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of the same way, which is interesting because if you're following the same curriculum, everyone should have the same beliefs, but similar to politics, everyone kind of has this left and right view. And it almost seems like doctors are either like all in on one thing or all in the other, but there's no thirst for learning new things. There's no innovative research when it comes to certain things. There's a lot of doctors specifically that I've talked to that they think that Humira medication is the only way to treat microns, personally. But they don't think to themselves, hey, listen, you've had some bad reactions. Instead of putting you on this other medicine, which, they pitched to me, they're like, why don't you go see a nutritionist? The nutrition, our food isn't as nutrient dense as when it was when I went to medical school. Things might be different. Why don't you do that? Give it a shot and then come back to me if that doesn't work. But they don't do that. They want to push an agenda, essentially.
Yeah, I think the challenge, right, is that if you look at medical school curriculum, they actually don't teach you a whole lot about nutrition. So the issue, right, I think a lot of it has to do with the training and the expertise of the doctor. Now, I have many patients who have Crohn's and are just lifestyle monitored, and they know when they flare, and then they sort of go back and But I think the challenge number one is what resources are available to you, and number two, how much time do you have to actually counsel the patient and say, look, here are all the options that are available to you. And let's now figure out what's what. I think what's really interesting, if you look at the medical billing world, right? And so let's go to the financial aspect of healthcare for a second, because that's going to open up a can of worms, but I'm going to do it. Is that when you look at billing and coding, the act of prescribing and monitoring a high-risk medication increases the level of billing and coding and what you can charge for insurance. If you were to just say, I'm going to spend this time and focus and counsel on lifestyle, it doesn't. So it makes you question, right? Is there a hidden agenda somewhere in this financial world that basically says, look, I'm going to pay you more the more you prescribe and the more lab tests you order, but I'm going to pay you less if you spend time counseling and educating your patients. And so I think for a lot of doctors, you get sucked into this world of okay, well, this is how I get paid. Here's what I'm supposed to do, as opposed to saying, let's take a step back and let's say, well, what are all the possibilities? Now, that's one option. The other thing is not everything is studied the same way, right? So lifestyle management of Crohn's may not be studied the same way as a drug-based management. Well, partially because the studies are funded in part by the pharmaceutical companies as they go through their clinical trials. You can't, who's going to pay to develop a clinical trial for lifestyle-based change? So, I think the unfortunate part is that the same system we're all subject to and we're all victims of. And not that it's bad, right? There's some patients of mine who've gotten great relief from Humira, but then have had to change to Stelara or had to go through cycles of medications. And for some people, no matter what they do, they need them. But for other people like yourself, if you really focus on what they can control in their lifestyle, it's cheaper, it's more sustainable. You empower them to understand their own body's reactions to things. And that's really important.
So true. And, again, it kind of goes back to what the curriculum and what we've been taught, not necessarily just on the doctor side, but just as humans, like things have drastically changed in 100 years. And a burger at McDonald's isn't as nutrient dense as what it is today. So, back in the day, it might have been okay to implement these type of foods into your diet. Now it just isn't. We know that. It's a fact that what we put in our body drastically changed rather our microbiome. And, we know the gut is really the first brain. I don't know if you agree, but a lot of gastro specialists that I've talked to, they're like, the brain obviously is, very important, but the gut is way more important than people might think. And what we put into our body is it's really so impactful on our entire ecosystem inside. And to me, it's almost like it's hard for us as human beings to sit down and just do that research. Sit down and say, if I just stop drinking, I could have some really incredible benefits. I'll sleep better. My entire gut will change. I won't have, this leaky gut that I have now. There's just little things that we could do, but drinking's fun. It's a blast. Putting poison in your face is one of the greatest things ever. Like it's an incredible invention. But like I stopped drinking over a year ago, and I think that definitely helps me personally recover and just overall my health. But it's these little things where it's hard for us human beings to change. We don't like change. We don't like the fact that McDonald's is bad for us anymore. We know it is, but we don't like to stop doing what we're used to.
Well, and yet if you look at the data, right, so if you look at the actual studies, the largest determinant of your health, right, I think it's about 38% of your health, is determined by individual behavior. So and if you look at all these things that determine health, individual behavior, social circumstances, your environment, and if the medical care that you get only determines about 11% of your healthcare outcomes. So on one hand, yes, I hear you, right? But on the other hand, it's that change in behavior that is likely to give you the largest impact in your health.
Yeah. Yeah, because we do kind of treat the doctors as if and I think you might have mentioned in one of your videos, we don't necessarily treat them to maintain our health. We treat them when we need them. That's kind of the wrong way to live, right? Like we only go to them if we have, issues in our gut. So by that time, it's too late, right? Because now we're treating the disease, if you have one, versus just living a healthy lifestyle all the time.
Correct.
And not going to the doctor. And I think that's a big reason I have a lot of buddies that live overseas, primarily like Italy and parts of Europe, where obviously, Italy, I think just a few months ago was the first one to ban all processed foods, which is fascinating because those are some of the longest living human beings on the planet. And, they live in that blue zone where everyone's over 110, 115 walking around Italy. And that's mainly because the food that they eat, the pasta that they have, the bread they have, it's 3-4 ingredients. Versus over here, you look on the back of a bread container, it's 18, 19, 20
Correct.
ingredients. So it's almost like we're kind of like feeding our bodies this disease all the time. But then we're like, oh, when we get sick, let's go to the doctor. We go to the doctor. Now we're putting in these artificial shots and these artificial pills and whatever it is. That was one thing that I saw with Humira in particular was I was eating a relatively healthy lifestyle, but at least for me, when I, did those shots, I think it was like every other week or something like that, I would constantly get infections, because essentially it's just dropping your immune system, right? So it can quote unquote, attack the Crohn's. But you're prone to 15 other things. So instead of just fixing the Crohn's, now let me put something foreign in my body. My body doesn't know how to react to it. And then now it's dropping my immune system. So now everything else in the world is going to mess me up. So when you start doing this education, and that to me is the most fascinating part about, like, as I get older, I mean, I'm almost 40 now, my way of thinking, I don't think like my body's an amusement park anymore, right? Like when I was in my 20s, if my 40-year-old self went back and said, hey, dude, just, don't eat that. Don't drink that. Don't do that. I'm going to be like, get out of here, man. Like, so I get it. Like people want to have a good time. I understand the world is great. There's a lot of cool things to do. But when you start to realize when you get a little bit older and you start having kids, as you know, whew, things change, man. You're like, I want to live till I'm 100 and I want to actually be able to do things. So I don't know, like, as this world continues to go the way we're going, especially here in America with our food and the ecosystem, like, can you see us changing our ways to where, we're fighting off how to battle these diseases?
I'd like to hope so, right? I think, back to what you were saying about processed foods, is even if you look at the processed foods in Europe versus in the US, the things that we allow here, they don't allow in many countries in Europe, right? So
That's
even
true.
the same companies, the same general, manufacturers who are making these things. So it begins to raise a question of, well, who is guiding this, right? How much of this is political? How much of this is science? How much of this is like intertwined between the two of them? So, we just came back from Portugal last week, and every time I go to Europe, I'm like, why does everything taste so much better? The same tomatoes taste better, and it's really it's just wild. But I think there's a lot more awareness than there used to be. I think we went to this world of, I think a lot of it is, post World War II era of, we don't know if there's going to be enough food, mass production, just sort of, all right, we just got to get as much volume out. But we don't live in that world anymore. We live in a world where, yes, for the vast majority of people, at least in America, there's, you have access to foods, but unfortunately you don't have access to good foods. And the processed foods that you have access to aren't necessarily that great for you. So there's, I think there's more awareness and education that has to come. But at the same time, if you are looking to your doctor as the healthcare authority, which it should be, right? I mean, if your physicians are the most trained, licensed, and your physicians themselves are not educated with how to help guide you, number one, or number two, let's say they are, but the financial incentive is not to pay them well for spending time teaching you and to pay them more to prescribe a medication, then the entire system is flawed. And I think, to me, when I look at physicians and patients in general, where they're like, oh, my doctor didn't do anything for me except to give me a pill. Well, did you ask your doctor, like, well, tell me about your life and your reimbursement structure and your employment structure? And then you begin to realize that, well, if they do a certain number of bills and codes, that generates their revenue. And if they don't do that, they get a pay cut. So you begin to sort of rethink this whole world of, all right, the people who are supposed to help me are actually victims of the same problem. And if they go to fix it, they're going to get penalized in the process.
Yeah. It's such a fucked up system. And you can curse, by the way. So it is such a fucked up system. And we really realized that when, we had our child. Because when my wife got done, literally, they stitched her up, they put her in a room, they rolled her in. 4 or 5 doctors would rotate coming in, and I had to literally kick them out. She's still drugged up, and she's coming down from the epidural, and she's still coming down for all this, and they're asking her questions. They're trying to get her to breastfeed. And I realized, I talked to my buddy who's a nurse practitioner, and he's like, well, yeah, dude, every time someone comes in, like, you're going to get billed for that. And I go, what? He goes, yeah, good thing you kicked him out. Because I kicked him out. Like, literally, there was I forget what it was. It was like, it was a breathing coach. It's a fucking, whatever, like 4 or 5 people. Like, I don't need you right now. Like, if I need you, give me a brochure, and that's fine. And I asked my buddy, I was like, is this like this all the time? He's like, oh, yeah, dude, it's gotten worse over the years. But they do that because, they're just going to bill you. If you spend time with that individual, they're going to bill you. And that's when it really hit me. It's like, I cannot believe how much of a business these things are. They did a great job delivering my child, don't get me wrong. But you could just deliver the child like in other countries, and that's it. Do your job, walk me through what you got to do, take care of me, but you don't necessarily have to bombard me and try to shove all these services down my face because you're already charging me an arm and a leg anyway. And in a lot of countries, it's free to have a kid, or a lot cheaper than America. So it's amazing the system that we're in. And when you visit and talk to these other countries, not saying that other countries are perfect. You're close to Canada, so I don't know how much if you have any friends up there or anything. But I got friends that are Canadian that come here for major surgeries. Like, I get it. Like, I get that's not but there's got to be something in between, right? We have to figure out what our neighbors are doing wrong, what we're doing wrong, and meet in the middle. But then, is it too late? Like, now we're battling against. It's like a restaurant trying to open up across from. I keep picking on McDonald's, but if you're going to open up a burger joint across from McDonald's, it's going to be an uphill battle. It's going to be tough. You're going to have to fight off a lot of consumers, right? Similar to how our taxes work. Someone saying, hey, put this over here, okay? Let's do this. Let's do that. Let's not take care of the citizens first. Let's take care of our pockets. And then, these human beings are giving birth to, one person every 7 seconds. Who cares? They just keep coming. It's all good. Like, I feel like.
The other interesting statistic is, right, if you look at the U.S., maternal mortality rate is among the highest in compared to other developed countries, right? So despite doing all of this, we still don't do a good job.
So crazy. And do you have an opinion, if you can speak to it, on what the perfect solution would be, if there is one?
I think if you look at other countries, and if you look at people who practice in the U.S., who train in other places, I think what you'll find is that When it comes to prevention, I think other countries do a really good job, and especially
Hmm.
when you look at, even South American countries, or where it's really about community-based health and wellness, and the interventions happen in the communities. And yes, are they're government funded? You've got you've got people going in there and giving healthcare to the people where they need it. So when
Hmm.
it comes to prevention, I feel like there's a lot better. There's a lot we can learn from other countries. When it comes to advanced disease, we do a pretty good job here, right? I think when it comes to, all right, how quickly can we save someone from a heart attack, stroke, you've got sort of all those things, we do really good.
Yeah.
But when it comes to saying, well, how do we prevent that in the first place? And let's just go back to where the whole thing started.
Yeah.
We don't. And I think it's unfortunate. Part of it is, I think the layers are very complex. So when it comes to insurance, once again, a whole can of worms, but a lot of ours is state regulated, right? So every state wants to make their own decisions on how things happen. So you're not going to get, unified, experiences across different state lines. That's just unfortunately the way it is. Number two, a lot of the policies dictate, what you can and cannot do, right? So then you've got your lawmakers, and then I'm like, well, how many of you are doctors again? Like, how many of you, who are making these decisions for people who actually have the background to be able to do that? So I think those are definitely things that sort of play a big role. And then I think the other piece is, we always look at countries, and like, for example, in Scandinavia, we're like, okay, they've got, the best in this or whatever. But then you look at their populations and, you begin to ask, well, are they as heterogeneous as our populations, right? So I think the other unique challenge in America is that we have people from all over the world. Yes, there's diversity in other countries, but we are built, our foundation is based on diversity. We have this influx. And so that creates unique challenges when you're trying to solve a problem for a particular group. It's not going to be the same solution for someone else. So for example, I'm South Asian, right? When we talk about cholesterol and diabetes, there's a whole argument that, well, our thresholds maybe need to be lower than other thresholds just because of our inherited risk. So I think that makes really, a big challenge, because you're taking a whole diverse group of people, you're lumping them together, and so you're going to get statistical variance in different outcomes for different people. Compared to countries that might be smaller, that might be a little bit more homogeneous than we are, and their solutions may be a little bit more applicable to all their population. So I think those, if I were to look at some of the biggest challenges, those are it. But the other challenge is a lot of these studies are not done always on diverse groups of people. So then you've got this,
right.
well, this was developed, but then, well, does that really apply to my patient that doesn't fit the demographic of their study population? So, that's where there's a lot of challenges. And unfortunately, some of this is, well, here's the best that we have and here's what we know. And then we see how you respond. There really isn't, a great option. But in terms of, if I had a fix to the U.S. healthcare system, I would probably be somewhere in D.C. right now, having a nice office somewhere. But but unfortunately, I don't.
I mean, listen, those are some damn good suggestions. That's the one thing I feel like we do lack, is we haven't really changed the way we structure things. And I think when we first, I don't know the history of doctors as a whole. I do know that back in, I think it was the 50s, that doctors were prescribing cigarettes because they said that was healthy for patients to try it. Now we know, going down the line, cigarettes obviously are cut full of chemicals and rat poison and all that stuff. But I mean, back in the day, it was just, straight up tobacco, nicotine. It wasn't as bad for you, right? And now we're realizing with studies saying that nicotine, point in fact, is actually good for you. Not necessarily cigarettes, but nicotine itself could give you a little boost, right? Not saying you should do shots of nicotine, but it's fascinating how we kind of go through these waves of knowledge, but nothing really gets changed on the upper level, which is fascinating to me. Because I remember seeing the food pyramid when I was in middle school, and they said that I needed to eat Cheerios and I needed to drink whole milk, and I needed. Well, it turns out, I don't know if you saw this. I'll try to ping it up here once I post this, but apparently, oatmeal, Quaker Oats, Cheerios, there was this chemical that they found inside these two products in particular that now has like massive risks to our health. Like, and it's not something that is in like a batch where it's recalled. Like this is something we've been consuming as a society for decades. And now we realize after all these studies that it's actually extremely bad for us. Again, Cheerios is still on the shelves today. If it's a FDA approved, that stamp of approval, I'm trusting you. I pay taxes for this shit. It's your job as the FDA to keep us safe, right? It's your job when I pay taxes to pave my road outside. It's your job to, but then down the road, something happened. Maybe it's 100 years ago, 50 years ago, something happened where we went from like, we really wanted to take care of our citizens, called 1776. We wanted to take care of our citizens. And then just somewhere along the line, it's like, but we could take care of them or we can make a shit ton of money. And if they die, they're never going to know because it is such a diverse country. They would literally have to test every single human being for 10 years straight, monitor us individually to find any causality of what we're actually intaking, right? You would have to, it's like that guy that did Supersize Me. He ate McDonald's every single day, 3-4 times a day. And he got sick. So we would have to do that with every human being. We'd have to study them intently to see what they're eating, to see what is actually causing issues.
Yeah, the food guide pyramid's interesting. So if you look at it, right, so we're not that far apart in age, and I grew up with it too as well. So,
Nice.
Unfortunately, when you really look at the history of the food guide pyramid, it was released a lot before the science was there, right? There's a whole sort of political background and sort of how did that come to be, but then you begin to say, wait a minute, so everything I learned as a kid, my carbohydrates being my 6 to 11 servings of carbs per day and yada yada, and then all of a sudden, well, like why do we have this obesity and diabetes epidemic that came out of there, right? So, and I think that we've seen that even more recently, right? So we've seen, oh, okay, you know what, like don't wear masks, wear masks. And so part of this, I think what we don't do well in this country is when we give information, we want it to be absolutist, right? We want to say, this is the only way of doing it. And we don't say, or at least we don't do a good job of saying, well, this is what we know today. What we may tell you tomorrow may change. And I think part of that is because we want people to have faith, right? And so when you make absolutist statements, people tend to have a lot more faith in what you're saying, even though you may rescind that statement a year later. And so I think the challenge that we have with the food guide pyramid and all the other stuff is we don't leave enough room to say, look, this is the best that we know today. That may be different tomorrow. So forgive us if we don't have the most perfect answer, but we want to come with the front of having as if we know everything. And then when we rescind that later on, people lose faith. And I think that's really the whole, what's happened is that people have lost faith. And I don't think it has to do with the content. I think it has to do with the messaging, because the content is only what we know up to a given point of time, right? And you do the best with, here's what we know, but we also don't do a good job of saying, well, we don't know this. We want to come up with an answer or a speculation, as opposed to saying, look, we just don't know. And that's okay, but people don't like the feeling that people don't know what to tell them.
So true. Yeah. And I think, the elites up there, the leaders of this great country, I feel like they're maybe obligated, because they want to tell us Americans, hey, listen, man, we're the superpower of the world. We got it. How do you fix COVID? We got this. Wear masks. Easy. Done. We're America. We know. Turns out we don't know. But we have to say that, though. We have to, I feel like they have this urge to tell us because a lot of other countries out there don't really know and admit it that they don't know, but they're working on the results. I can't speak for all Americans. I could say, I think in 2024, we're all at the point now where we're sick of the shit. I'd rather 50% of everything than pretend you know 100% of everything. Because at least I know you could be objective, and at least I know you can evolve and change and adapt. Because now I just look at everything that I've been taught for 30 years. I don't want to say it's bullshit. That's the wrong word. But it's similar to when I see doctors. I listen to what they say, but I do other research. Not because I don't trust the doctor. It's because the doctor's a human being. I'm a human being. I know about podcasting. I know about health and wellness. I know my expertise. But when I say something, I never, ever say I guarantee it. Because it could be different in 10 years. Like when I was a certified personal trainer, I'm not even, there's a reason why you have to get certified every 4 years. It's because things change. You learn new things, and you can't have someone do one specific workout when it turns out, oh, that's going to injure that individual. We found that out through these studies. So it's like you have to continuously learn to adapt. And I think as Americans, we're just getting a little bit more aware of this. Thank goodness for TikTok. I got to tell you, though, I'm a big fan of TikTok. I don't like TikTok for a lot of other reasons, but it's interesting to see regular people, especially as a new parent, you sift through all the bullshit, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can read, what to expect when you're inspecting, and that's great. But it's also great just to hear from 50 moms, that have been through it. And you're not going to agree with a lot of what they say, but there might be a couple things in there you could pick apart. It's like a buffet, right? You can learn from different things. It's not always so absolute with everything. And that's what I think TikTok has gotten all this attention, is because it isn't one specific thing versus what Twitter used to be or what Facebook used to be, which is we kind of got shoved this information, and someone up top might have been messing with the strings a little bit, and we only got one side of things for a lot of different reasons. Zuckerberg himself has even come out saying, hey, listen, we got fed this information about this specific topic. I don't even want to say it just because I don't want to get this episode removed, but we got fed this specific topic from the FBI, and turns out it was false information. But they pushed that out there on their newsfeed. Fascinating. The fact that millions and millions of people read that, thought it was one thing, and then turns out it's not that. It's dangerous, man. It's kind of a dangerous time.
Yeah, I think what's also really interesting what you said about TikTok, right? So let's go back to healthcare for a quick second, and I want to sort of apply that same knowledge, right? So there's certain people, let's say you were to come to me, right, and you were to say, hey, you know what? I saw this on TikTok. Let's talk about this supplement, or let's talk about, let's talk about this on potty training because I happen to see this from another parent. Once again, it goes back to, for me as a physician to say, well, let me validate that, spend time with you. Let's talk about this. Let me hear you out. Let's look at the video together. Let me give you my professional take on it. That stuff doesn't get paid the same way, right? Yeah, so is it the right thing to do? Absolutely, right? Is it the right? So I have tons of patients who, they send me articles all the time. They'll text me like, hey doc, check out this new genetic testing. What do you think? Right. And so to me, that's where the model that I practice in is completely valuable for my patients, because I am their additional layer of, hey, I'm given this information. Let me feed it through to my doctor to say, process this for me with your background.
That's right.
And give it back to me. And whether you agree with it or not, that's a totally different discussion. But the ability to say, let me digest and synthesize this for you, and let's have a conversation to say, what do we know about this? What do I know about this? That, once again, right, the system doesn't value the financial reimbursement, doesn't value the time to spend to educate. So then what happens? You've got to then go to platforms on social media to be able to spread that education, because you can't necessarily do that in the office room unless you have a practice like mine, where we work in a totally different financial structure.
Yeah, and that's great too, because I mean there isn't a lot of doctors that I've run into that follow any specific structure except for kind of what we're used to, and it's very similar to like how you would treat a restaurant, right? Like it's turn and burn. It's the more tables I turn, the more money I'm going to make, and that's where I think there was a disconnect at some point, and maybe it was big pharma that created these incentives to push these meds, and then you get a kickback from it. And it's like, oh, that's fascinating. I love my patients, but what's great? My new speedboat. That's pretty cool too. So you spend enough years kind of going down that, it's kind of hard to get away from, and I get it. I really do. But then I look back at, okay, so if these are privatized companies, quote unquote, private companies, private practices, they're still getting incentivized, but there's no regulation of these incentives. In fact, quite the contrary, right? I mean, they're kind of getting pushed the wrong way. That's good for the patient, rather. Like, it should always be us, right, as top priority, but it seems like it's getting pushed not in our best interest.
What's interesting, right? There was an article that came out in terms of who's making money in healthcare, and it was a really interesting headline. It was who's making the money in healthcare, and it's not big pharma. And so I think what's interesting, and I challenge everyone to look at, is look at your nonprofit hospital systems. and take a look and see, well, how much profit are they actually making, right? And because they have to have no profit on the books, they reinvest by buying up doctors' offices, by buying up their competitors, but they
Wow.
are making profit. So I think what's really interesting and eye-opening for me was, how are they nonprofit when they're generating so much profit? They're just nonprofit a lot of times on paper because they have to be, but their profit they're using in often ways to purchase other groups and to sort of expand their market size,
To
because
gain
that's an
assets.
investment
Yeah.
to gain assets. So
Wow.
I think, yes, big pharma has a bad rep. However, I think if you look a lot more closer in terms of newer data that's come out and say, well, who is actually making money in the healthcare system, you'll find that some of the answers are going to be quite surprising.
That is crazy. And that makes so much sense now that you say that. I didn't even think about that because, yeah, I mean, a lot of us think, oh, these big hospitals and these big companies are just making money based off of, our bills that we're doing. But then you also think, well, how is there a hospital for St. Joseph's or, Advent Healthcare? How is there one like every 2 miles? Like, how is there a small practice every 5? How is there, like, how do they make, these are relatively new companies. Did just a bunch of venture capitalists come in and just buy all these hospitals? They're popping up everywhere. And then you got an urgent care. That's the same parent company. And you're like, what the fuck? How? There's more of these than Starbucks. Like, that's crazy to me. And are we that sick? So that's another red flag, is like, why do we need so many of these places? And then you look at it like, okay, we're so far down the path. This is where my conspiracy theory tinfoil hat goes on. We're so far down this path, Doc, that let's say there's a cure for cancer. Let's just throw it out there. Okay, let's try to get canceled. Let's say there's a cure for cancer. All these hospitals that treat cancer, what are they going to do now? All these companies that treat us, all these hospitals that take us, all these urgent cares, they got all these staff members. We're so down the wrong path, I think, and we have so many of these buildings. It's weird to me that when there is like a crazy cure for something so simple, like, vitamin D deficient, which 70% of Americans are, and all you have to do is get, a couple thousand IUs a day, and a lot of your problems might be solved. But we don't even like teach that when you go in. They're taking our blood and so why exactly are we so far down this path, and can we get away from it? I don't know.
I think we're trying. I think
Yeah.
there's definitely trying. I think what it is interesting, because if you look at, so number one, let's talk money again, right? So
Mhm.
for every primary care physician that a hospital system owns, that doctor is likely to generate a couple of $1 million in profit for that system down the stream, right? And because of all their referrals and the imaging and stuff. So for a hospital system, it is profitable to acquire primary care practices, turn them into employees of their system, and then subject them to sort of their policies, procedures, and stuff, right? So that number one, it's, yes, you're investing in expanding, knowing that you're going to be getting a lot more money at the back end. So that's number one. Number two is there is an inherent tension between keeping people in the hospital and out of the hospital, right? So you're right. If you've got 100 beds to fill, you need to fill those 100 beds, or you've got to decrease the size of your unit. But at the same time, you want people to not be in those beds because you want them to be out in the community, healthy, doing what they need to do. So we're caught in this tie of, what do we really want, right? Do we want those beds filled? Or do we really want to say, we don't need so many hospitals, we don't want these beds filled? But I think a lot of this has to go with access to primary care. We don't have good access to primary care. So when you don't have access to primary care, you're going to have your urgent care centers, because someone's going to need to get care and they're going to go to the nearest urgent care center. You're going to have the ER over, so the ER is in a whole other interesting thing, right? So the past couple of years, emergency medicine physician residencies went unfilled, right? And so how is it that you don't have doctors who want to become emergency room medicine doctors? Because they have some of the highest burnout in the industry, right? Where the average ER doctor may make it 10 years in the industry and then leave. So the ER that was designed for these emergencies are primary care overflow. Your urgent cares are primary care overflow. So
Yeah.
when you don't fix the primary care system, it is going to give opportunity for higher cost healthcare services to be able to come in,
Mm,
not for any other reason except for the fact that, hey, it's a financially viable model. You're helping some people who aren't getting the care, but you're not fixing the root of the care problem, which is
that's right.
getting them primary care in the first place.
Oh, I didn't even think about the ER. Yeah, that's crazy because that's what it is. I mean, it's kind of like if you don't have a main doctor and there's a serious issue that you have, you go to the ER. So, I mean, I can't imagine how many people they get per hour, but I know every time I go there, every time I had to go for my Crohn's, it was packed, jam packed, and you get bumped down to the line, and then by the time you get in there, you end up staying, a few hours, and then if you get overnight stay, and they're like, hey, we don't know what's wrong with you, so let's do a CT scan, a CAT scan, and then it's like, Jesus, all right, let me get more radiation on my body, cool. It's like we almost don't, like we've talked about in the beginning. We're not treating our bodies the way we need to, treat them on a daily basis, maybe because there isn't the education. And that leads us to make these decisions like, I need to go to urgent care because I don't know what's going on. This has never happened before. And then we don't also think to ourselves that we're putting in these weird substances on a daily basis to us. I talk about this a lot on my podcast to where, if you really want to know what's bothering you, do an elimination diet and maybe a water fast if, you're around a professional that knows what to do. But if you just like take out all the foreign shit out of your body and just try like whole foods, organic, shop on the outer aisles, don't go in the inside, don't get bags. If your food's in a bag, like chips and fucking bread and all that stuff, you don't need to do it. You can make your own bread. Get a KitchenAid. There's 4 ingredients in bread. You can make your own. Just try it. Try it for 30 days and you will feel 1,000 times better, which is why, you feel so great when you go overseas and eat that food. And if you can do that, you're still going to have health issues, sure. But when you're 60, when you're 70, that's how it's supposed to go. You shouldn't be going to the hospital when you're 30. The fact, especially I've delved so much into the Crohn's community. I even have a TikTok page called Dealing with Crohn's, where I connect with a lot of other Crohn's patients and survivors and warriors and stuff. And it's fascinating when I talk to all these people, and it's all like the same issues. They're like 25, 30 years old, and they just started having these issues. It's not like you're born with it. It's not like you're born with, scars in your intestines. Like it's not, but that's somehow as our lives go on, all these millions and millions of people are getting scars in their intestines. So, okay, what is one thing that we put in our body that passes through our intestines? Food. So let's just figure that out. Let's talk about that, and then we could try to fix it. But it's so crazy how we just don't want to educate ourselves because again, a Big Mac is good. So I mean, I get it, but it's weird, man.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right? So the two organ systems have direct access to outside your body, or your respiratory system and your GI system, right? Those are pretty much your skin is barriers. But in terms of like, hey, we've got direct access, those are your two systems where, all right, environment, you breathe, goes directly in, lungs, capillaries, and then your GI system, right? So those are, if you conceptually go back, you're like, okay, those are two really important things to think about when it comes to health is, all right, what do we put in our lungs? What do we put in our gut? But I have an amazing hypnotherapist in our practice, and one of the things that her quote, to paraphrase her, which I think I absolutely love, is the most intimate relationship you have in this world is with your food, because everything that you eat becomes a very part of your being, right? And so if you really think about it, it's just like, look at all your relationships. It's food is the most intimate because that becomes who you are.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna steal that. I'm gonna give her credit, of course. But yeah,
her name is Deb Macaron. So if you want to give her credit, that's her name.
Shout out Deb. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, so beautiful, and especially because it is so powerful what you put in your body. That's a big reason why I cut out booze. And I'm not saying don't drink alcohol because it's great. I get it. But when you start appreciating food for what it is, which is just not indulgence, it's just fuel. You know, it's gas for your car. You know, it's not supposed to be flashy and pretty and taste good. Is it better when it's a cheesecake? Of course, 100%. But when you start understanding that little thing that you're putting in your body once a weekend for 30 years straight could have a huge impact on your health. And that's just with one meal, right? That doesn't include the cigarettes you're smoking and the shots of tequila that you're doing. It's like, man, when you start really appreciating it, and then, you know, I also, when you go to these other countries, I know you mentioned you've done some traveling as well. When you go to these other countries and you realize that we are so gluttonous and disgusting, and just the way we eat our food is mind-boggling. When you go to another country and you see their meals, their size of meals, and what we eat, like my buddy, he's from Rome, and he told me that when you're in Rome and there's Americans, they always joke because, like, internally in the kitchens, they're like, do they want our plate or do they want an American-sized plate?
That's funny.
So
That's
when Americans come, they're like expecting, oh, they're going to take seconds. Because in Italy, I don't know if you've ever been. I mean, it's a normal dish. Like, it's supposed to be, you know, a scoop of pasta. And they always joke internally. And we don't know that, obviously, but that is just disgusting, the fact that other countries, you know, think of us like that. It's weird.
You know, and I think that, right, as we start talking about even just sort of the obesity, you know, epidemic, is when you look at our style of eating and when you look at what we're doing, right, we do a lot of mindless eating, right? So let's have, you know, popcorn while we're watching the movies, or like, let's, you know, have dinner while we're watching TV, right? So we begin to not pay attention. We train our bodies. We train ourselves to ignore our body's cues, right? So when it comes to portion sizes, we train ourselves to say, well, let's just not even pay attention to what our hormones are telling us. You know, let's just, all right, we are externally fixated that we lose connection of our internal signals. And so therefore we just keep on with the motor, right? So there's certainly, when I tell people, like, look, try not to eat while you're watching TV, because you pay attention to the way your body feels and what it tells you and how you're reacting to food. The other one is, you know, I personally believe there's something to be said about having that moment before you eat, right? You may do have a prayer. You may have a mindful moment. You may just want to stare at your food to be like, okay, well, thank you for being a part of who I am. It's that moment of acknowledgement that begins that process of, all right, hormones, I'm about to put you in. Let's start, you know, and so we don't do much of that. We're eating on the go. We have created a society where we've developed these bad habits. But if you look at Europe in a lot of places, and, you know, there's parts of Europe obviously really busy, but for them, it's a ritual. Eating is a ritual. They sit down, they have conversations, they take it slowly, as opposed to, I got 5 minutes on my lunch break, let me scarf down the quickest thing I can and then head back to work again, right? So,
That's right.
you know, it's unfortunate, but I think there's those simple things that you can do to change is, all right, let me, you know, no TV when you're eating. Spend the time focusing on your food. You know, say a mindful moment, prayer, whatever you want to call it. Just saying, I acknowledge the food in front of me, so that you verbally create that intention of, this is what this food is doing. And if you really want to say, hey, food, are you worthy of becoming a part of who I am? And you want to ask that question, which is also from Deb. Ask the question, right? You may choose differently if you ask that question with the food in front of you.
I love that. Yeah, I'm taking that too. Shout out Deb. Deb, just send over everything that you've said in your life. It's fascinating, because one thing that I haven't done, but that I started doing just in the last couple of years is chewing, which just sounds crazy, but I actually chew until it's completely dissolved. I never swallow whole pieces, which sounds weird, but a lot of people just think about this next time you eat your meal. Is usually it's like 1-2 bites and you swallow. I haven't had steak in a while because I mostly eat plant-based, but let's just say hypothetically a steak, I would chew 50 times. 50 times, one bite before I even take another bite. Like, I'm talking in mouth, set the fork down, chew, enjoy it, soak in the juices, right? Because, so like, if you're swallowing it right away, how are you going to taste it? Like, once it's down there, you know what I mean? Your stomach's not going to say, yummy, right? Like, you need to enjoy it in your mouth and just take your time. And I've been doing, it takes me a long time to eat dinner, but it's so enjoyable because I'm just sitting there with my wife and we're hanging out and we chew and chew. And typically we chew and the other person talks. So as you're chewing, now you're listening to conversation. Fascinating. You'll learn a lot about your partner when you actually listen. Like, it's just these little things that I've done. And it's really helped me out, I think, a lot, because when I was intaking all this food in one big meal, I would feel bloated and gross. And, that's the problem with a lot of people that struggle with IBS is, you feel that bubbly gut and that bloating. And I don't have that anymore because I take my time with food and I don't think of it like a party. I just think of it like I need the nutrients,
Yeah, and that's really hard because, well, a couple of things, right? So chewing, fascinating stuff, right? So number one, it helps sort of begin that hormonal change when you're eating, sort of chewing. Number two, chewing more triggers more saliva to get produced, right? And saliva has salivary amylase, and that sort of helps digest the food. So you make digestion a lot more easier too, by chewing more. The other really interesting thing is, right, from a flavor standpoint, your olfactory nerve, in terms of being able to sort of, what is the actual taste of the food? What emotions am I feeling? That situational awareness and mindfulness really develops. I think for a lot of us, the other challenge, right, is we are training our kids not to chew because let's go back to when you're young, right? You're a busy parent. You're like, I got to do this. Come on, eat your dinner. One spoon after the other. Let's go. Right. And so it's, and I think even as a parent, sometimes I'm guilty of this too as well. I'm like, whoa, what am I doing to my child? Is I want them to eat quickly because I got to go to the next thing. And I don't have an hour to spend with them to be like, let's taste every pea. So I think it goes back to, even when it comes to parenting, is teaching your kids to chew, because the whole one bite after the other is you're setting them up for the whole idea of volume to fill their stomach, as opposed to really taste the flavor and take it slow and begin to process it. So, I think we see it for ourselves, but then also if we have kids, take that pause moment to be like, how am I feeding my child? And how quickly am I feeding them? And am I forcing them to eat a little too quickly because I don't have the time?
Oh, that's so true. And subconsciously, I think, thank goodness, I was ahead of this before my daughter was born, because she just started eating mushed foods. So we make her own baby food. So she did avocados. Last week we put her on bananas and sweet potatoes a few days ago. So now she's on like smashed up pears and bananas, and we're kind of mixing some foods now. But we're still smashing them together and feeding it to her in a spoon. She's actually feeding herself with it, good. But we'll do one spoonful and then we'll take it away completely, and then she'll play on the mat. And subconsciously, I wasn't in a hurry because now I eat slowly. But I think like 2 years ago, Tony, would have been different. Would have been like spoon, swallow. Okay, spoon, swallow. Okay, great. Let's hurry up so we can get the solid foods. Okay, let's go. You need to learn how to eat solid. But really, if we could just all eat like kids and just take our time, right? And teach our kids that way. That is fascinating, because I think once you're down that path of teaching your kids to eat quick, that's it, right? Because they're gonna eat fast, like they're in prison. They can't change things. You can't reverse that. And then it's too late. And now we're just on this path of like snowballing effect of, the obesity factor that keeps hitting the country.
The other interesting tip that I had gotten from a friend of mine, and we don't do this all the time, unfortunately, but I feel like, and she did it with her kids, is she always has a candlelight dinner. And I think, and I don't know, this has never been studied, so like, don't quote me on this, it's my opinion, is I think that when you have a candle, right, there's, and you're sitting there and you've got this flame, there's this inherent hyper awareness of the flame that brings you back to that very moment, right? And maybe it's evolution, maybe it's our biology of, whoa, that flame could be dangerous, so I have to be mindful of what I'm doing. So I wonder, right, and because she would always do this for dinner, is I wonder if having even just a candle in front of you for dinner, does that create more awareness to what you're actually doing because of this evolutionarily, perhaps predisposition of saying, that can hurt. If I don't pay attention to what I'm doing, that can cause a problem. So let me actually pay really close attention. And therefore, do you, as a byproduct, become more aware of your eating and what you're doing?
That is interesting. Yeah, because you're obviously not going to watch TV or read a book when you have a candle lit. Correct. And eating, right? So yeah, you're focusing on that meal. That's fascinating. We might try that tonight, Doc. That's a great idea. I think that's really cute. That's a great idea.
We do it for a lot of things, right? Yeah. We do it for, you want to read a book, candlelight, whatever. But why not make it a ritual of, all right, dinner is with a candle and you're there and you're focused.
Yeah. And there's got to be something, like you said, like from ancestry, there's got to be something you're not only you're looking at that flame, but also like maybe deep down, it's like, this is where food came from, right? Like originally we were able to eat cooked food from this one flame, because before that we're eating raw food and dying pretty quick. So maybe there's something where it's like, you got to appreciate it. It helps you appreciate food a little bit more, which I could see. Because that's what I look at when I have a big brick oven pizza that I built at home, and it's out in my backyard. And every time I chop wood and, light this fire up, there's something that happens in me. And it's definitely caveman. In fact, I was reading a recent study that it says chopping wood helps men. It increased their testosterone by like over 11% versus even working out. So like if you just look up chopping wood, so there's something like in there where chopping wood, lighting up a fire and just watching the fire, it doesn't help that I was a pyromaniac when I was a kid, but there's something in that. I think that flame, I think you're right. There's something deep inside of us. That's fascinating. Interesting. Okay. Well, for everyone out there, light a candle, chew your fucking food, okay? And make sure your kids don't eat fast. Doctor, listen, we're already at an hour. Sorry if this is longer than you expected, but I enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate you coming on. I learned a lot today.
Likewise. Thank you very much for having me.
If you can, give everyone a shout out. I'm going to leave, for everyone just watching this or listening, I'm going to leave all the links and your social media below. But if you can, for people just listening, give them a shout out where they can find you on social media, any websites you want to shout out, all that stuff.
My Instagram handle is Dr. VK. And the one for my practice is at the number 4 Elements MD. And I'm also on TikTok. TikTok, I do more Instagram than TikTok. TikTok's more of, I'm still figuring out how I want to have a presence on TikTok. But Instagram is a place to find me. And you can find some more links over there too.
Doctor, pleasure having you on. Hang out a little bit longer. I'm going to kill this feed. But Dr. V, can I call you Dr. V?
Sure, call me Dr. V.
Dr. V, make sure you guys follow him. This was a great conversation. Thanks so much. Everyone have a great day. Take care of your body and your soul. Later on.